We're going to be picking up this evening in the 15th book of Yisrayl, Righteousness Prevails, and we're going to be on chapter 36 this evening, if you have your 15th books of Yisrayl with you, which is on page 389. And this is chapter 36. Pastor delivered this message November 7th, 2015, and it was entitled, Sickness and Disease, the Worst Ever for This Generation. Okay, which we know was one of the prophecies that Yeshua had brought about how in these last days these things would grow worse. And the prophet Yeketskiah wrote and was inspired to write how we would see the sins reach their peak in this last generation. So we're going to be on page 389. Pastor says, Shalom everyone, praise Yahweh, come on, joyful cheering and praise to Yahweh. There you go, that's right, praise Yahweh, you may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. He says the world, in verse 2, he says the world is going crazy, gone crazy. And the Passover is coming, praise Yahweh. Start thinking about protection and leading a bunch of people out of this mess that they're in. Remember what the Passover represents, this shadow of protection, this protection from the death that passed over the children of Israel in Egypt. And also in these last days, it represents, this death that's coming upon mankind, how it will pass over the sons of Israel in these last days. This is a great start. He shows the bread sack on the monitor. It's going to take a little time to read this, but it's well worth it to you. And the bread sack says, all the different foods we get to try, they are so tasty, I'm not going to lie. Come for Yahweh's special treat. It's pure and clean. Yahweh doesn't miss a beat. Today, Yahweh is bringing oaky food from the Philippines, the ones who watched you teach on their screens. Now they're here holding Yahweh's laws very dear. And that was one of the bread sacks. The pastor said, praise Yahweh. The other bread sack was, Yahweh is calling his people home, away from the hills of Rome. From all nations they will come, out of the wicked and evil ones. I'll put it that way. They used another word there. He's laughing, and it says, Yahweh's righteousness, they will learn, taught by Yisrael Hawkins, how not to burn. You're getting all that, right? We've got a song coming here. You can see how some of these bread sacks really do rhyme and come together. And the other one, he says here in verse 5, we praise you, Yahweh, that your teaching has fallen like rain upon a branch, and from that branch upon his seed, just as the rain is life to a plant, so are your words oakified through Yisrael life to us. Praise Yahweh. And we have to be mindful in remembering, as the prophet Isaiah wrote, that they would spring up like willows among the grass by the watercourses in Isaiah chapter 44 and verse 4. And this, just as we see that rain is life to a plant, we can see how Yahweh's words, oakified through our pastor Yisrael Hawkins, are life to us. And if you ever do any reading, they have a bunch of things out there on the internet, or you could even read it in different gardening books and such, or even like flowering, how to raise gardens or flowers. But rainwater has a higher nutritional value and is much more beneficial for plants, for grass, than just regular water, well water or tap water. And there's almost a they'll call it, in a lot of these books, they'll call it like there's something magical about rainwater. We know it's not magical, okay, but there's this, the word magical is defined as being the power of apparently influencing the course of events by using mysterious or supernatural forces, and then wonderful or exciting. Okay, and that's what they use a lot of times in place instead of showing Yahweh's awesomeness. But we know pastor's words, his teachings, are to us what rain is to a plant or to grass. And you'll notice it that they'll talk about these things in different books and write-ups online. How people, they notice that their grass, in the middle of the summer, just using their tap water. Of course, they waste a lot of tap water, and pay a lot of money to try to have a green plush lawn, but the tap water just doesn't get it that vibrant, great, brilliant green, and we can see here sometimes how the grass will start getting yellow and dying, and looking pretty rough, and we get a nice rain, and it greens right up, and this is the same for us, pastor's words. Pastor's words are this super nutritious, supernatural force, these teachings that come straight from Yahweh, all right? And if we take these things, then we're able to live according to the laws of Yahweh, because these words are life to us. We got to be mindful of these things and being really diligent and firmly adhering to what pastor's teaching, because he's not bored, and just getting up here and just talking. He's bringing us the words of life, and we're going to see this here going on in the sermon about how important these teachings are that we're being taught in these last days at this time period. But continuing on here on page 389, reading in verse 7, pastor says, "Not all is well." Not in the world anyway. Not all is well. We are bringing sickness into the camp. We need to be very careful about bringing sickness into the camp. So this is a warning to the wise. This is for us here. He says we need to be careful about bringing sickness into the camp. We have sprays. Our shoppers, they spray themselves down, boots and all, their mask and everything. They spray the stuff they get before they bring it to you, before it's delivered to you, and they're very careful. And there's a lot of, if you're not going to wear, if you have to go out in the world and you're not going to wear physical gloves, pastors always talked about, got the invisible gloves, you have the thieves spray, the shadow, you have lye water, lye soap. We can, even if somehow you get, you might not be here at Abel, might not be able to be accessing these great benefits that we do have here with some of these different things. But even if you're stuck out in the middle of nowhere, they got Lysol, and you can make your own lye water. And you do a little reading, it shows you how to make your own lye water from wood ash. But even Lysol, it's called Lysol. Pastor talked about that once, about how it has the lye in there, the lye from the wood ash. So we have to be really on guard, men. Really on guard to guard Yahweh's house from this sickness. Because we don't want to bring sickness from the world back into the camp. Because we're striving diligently to stay out of the world. We wouldn't want through carelessness and lackadaisicalness to go out. Come into contact with sickness. Harbor these things and then bring them back with us. So we really need to be on guard. If we have to go out and, pastors encourage us to really limit our time that we spend out in the world, really cut down on how much we have to go out there, and he's talked about examples about how his mother only went, to town and back maybe twice a year, and it's possible to do. You could really make plans and you could do these things, and we have great resources here at the House of Yahweh to be able to make plans where you don't have to go out in the world every day, every week, not even every month. But continuing on here, pastor says, but we're still getting, this is in verse 8 on page 390, but we're still getting sickness brought into the camp, and it's being passed around in the camp. And the funny thing about sickness is, it's kind of like unclean foods. You don't see instant results. You don't go out in the world and forget to wear gloves or put some kind of protection on your hands, some thieves or some shadow, and then you come home and bam, you're sick like that. Usually it doesn't take place that quick. But these things, you might take something into your body, and these things start a process inside your body, and you can actually be carrying a sickness and spreading it to others through speech and touching things, and it might not get you sick for many, many weeks or months, but it could be causing others to get sick very quickly. This week there was a virus, a stomach virus, and being summertime right now, they have a lot of different sicknesses that are being spread in the world because of their unclean lifestyles. They go and they have these pools, swimming pools. They're really nothing more than a cesspool. And even in the news, I think it was just last week, they were talking about cryptosporidium being in the pools, and they were talking about taking certain precautions, and if you had certain conditions that you shouldn't swim for so many weeks after it clears up, and you got to make sure to treat the pools with a strong dose of chlorine. And I remember once Pastor had read an article, and it showed about the amount of chlorine they would have to use to kill these viruses. People wouldn't be able to swim in there. It'd burn their skin, it'd burn their eyes. So all they're really doing is they're kind of just holding things at bay, and then people go and they think they're having a real great fun time, and they're actually spreading sickness and disease at a very multiplied rate. It kills the stomach virus. It kills enzymes, especially the digestive enzymes of your body. You need to replace them if you get it. That's the fastest way to get over it, to replace the enzymes. There are some other things you can check out at the health food stores, and they'll tell you what the doctors say for you. We know there's a lot of healthy, nutritious drinks, that actually restore enzymes into our gut. These prebiotics and probiotics, that are actually very beneficial, and they actually have a fine taste to them, a lot of them, and if you don't enjoy the taste, maybe you can figure out how to. Sometimes you can sweeten them or add things to them. But these things actually restore to our digestive system things that get lost from these stomach viruses, these viruses which kill these enzymes, and you want to make sure you're maintaining a healthy digestive system, and you got to have healthy enzymes in your digestion in order to break down the foods you eat and to keep you from getting sick. Pastor says here in verse 9 on page 390, I'm really looking forward to this Passover because of the leading of Yahweh's people out of Egypt. That's going to take place again. Okay, remember Jeremiah 23, verses 7 through 8, where it talks about how they're no longer will they say, surely Yahweh who lives, who brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, but they're going to say, surely Yahweh lives, who brought and led the seeds of the house of Israel to the protected place. Okay, they're going to be speaking about this last day's work. This last day's work is going to be the one that actually resurrects and brings back all the other works of Yahweh. They without us would not make it. Remember what the scripture says. I'm really looking forward to the Passover because of the leading of Yahweh's people out of Egypt. That's going to take place again. Wicked Egypt. That's what the work is doing right now. We're leading the people out of the Coptic religion. And just to look here about this wicked Egypt, in Hebrews chapter 11, it's written and it's shown here. Remember, Moshe was the one whom Yahweh used at the time to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. Well, Moshe actually chose, he chose to take the job that Yahweh had given him, just as we see in these last days with our teacher, the great Khan Yisrayl Abel Hawkins. He actually chose to take the job that Yahweh had given him. We've seen other examples in Scripture where people didn't take their job and Yahweh had to replace them. But you see here Moshe in Hebrews chapter 11, for your notes, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 25, or verses 23, 25, 26, and 27, it says, by the faith, Moshe, and then verse 25 says, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of Yahweh than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of a saint greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. For he was looking to the recompense of the reward. He was looking towards the future. He wasn't looking for pleasing himself at that moment, at that time. The things that were entertaining or enjoyable, or he wasn't looking for that. He was looking towards Yahweh's kingdom. Motivated by the faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for as though seeing the invisible one, he endured. And remember, this is the same thing we see with Yahweh's seventh Malach. Pastor Israel Hawkins actually chose, I don't know if you remember some of the older sermons, but Pastor talked about some of the older sermons, how, before the work of Yahweh really grew, Pastor was a very successful businessman in Abelin, and he had over 100 rent houses, and at one point was making more money in a year than the President of the United States was making. Okay, and he actually took those things and got away from that. He actually took a large, portion of his earnings to build this building that we sit in right here, and to build up this land here that we see out here on the 44. Praise Yahweh. So he actually made that choice, to put down his own desires, wants, lusts, and actually to do the work of Yahweh, to look towards the kingdom of Yahweh. and we really have to be having that same mindset. We have to really be focusing on the kingdom of Yahweh. And there was some great sermons brought last week at the feast and the extra days of rejoicing there, and about thinking about those who are coming to Yahweh's house. Because if we're focused on ourselves and me, I, then we're really missing the big picture, and we're not qualifying for what Yahweh's called us to qualify for. To be the leaders of these 2 billion people, and 2 billion is a huge, enormous amount of people, and it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice, and we're really going to have to be diligent in putting down our own lusts and desires. Remember what Jacob said in Jacob chapter 4 about what causes wars and fighting amongst you. Is it not from our unlawful lusts that battle within our members? We have to put down these lusts, and we have to actually build Yahweh's lust, Yahweh's desires into our mind, and allow that to consume our lives so that we are able to actually, lay down our lives for our fellow men. Many of them we haven't seen. We haven't even seen, 1,000 men, show up last feast. That would be a huge amount of work, but 2 billion people, and that's one of the priests talked about that. Maybe Yahweh allowed them to come in waves, as it were, because if they all came at once, we might be overloaded. But Yahweh's given us this. He's giving us this time period right now to be able to train for these things, and this is what Pastor says here in verse 9 about why he's really looking forward to the Passover, because the leading of Yahweh's people out of Egypt, that's going to take place again. Wicked Egypt. That's what the work is doing right now. We're leading the people out of the Coptic Catholic religion that's now stationed in Egypt and also the 7 hills of Rome. Coptic Catholic religion worships all gods. Yahweh showed his power over the gods when he brought them out, and he's doing it again right now. You wouldn't be here if he wasn't. Okay? So remember that. Yahweh is once again showing his power and leading his people out of Egypt. And if it wasn't for his power, we would not be here. The house of Yahweh would not exist. Because as we saw at Passover about how hard, Satan has been trying throughout the years to destroy this work, without Yahweh's protection, we would be like many other groups. They weren't the house of Yahweh, and they didn't have Yahweh's protection, and now they no longer exist. They've been wiped out, blotted out. Many of them have been killed and buried. Some have been locked up in prisons for the rest of their lives. Now, jumping over here to page 391. Page 391, Pastor's talking. He talks a little bit here about these apps. They got these different apps on these phones and these smartphones, and the apps are the new, bar scene or party scene. You get on these apps and you can go and spread diseases. And that's what Pastor's showing here about, in verse 21, he talks about how on these apps, this app means... application means you're filling out an application to do certain things here, and a lot of these apps for these phones are geared towards fornication, adultery, sodomy, and bestiality, spreading sickness through unlawful sexual acts. But Pastor says here in verse 25, he says, this is Satan's job. This is Satan's job, okay, this spreading of these diseases. And he talks about here about how these different sexually transmitted diseases and STIs, sexually transmitted infections, such as syphilis and gonorrhea, how these things are spreading on a rapid rate and are increasing since a lot of these apps have come out. This is Satan's job. It's the Pope's job. It's his mission, his goal, to turn as many people as he can against Yahweh's laws of righteousness. It's our job to turn people to them. And we're on the rise and he is on the fall. Our job, the house of Yahweh, each one of us, man, you and I, every one of us here, and those who are not able to be here at this time because of restrictions that man's placed on them and they're spread throughout the earth. But we are the ones whom Yahweh is actually going to use, okay? And it's going to be our job to turn people towards righteousness, because Satan's job, the Pope's goal right now, Satan's goal is to turn as many people as possible against Yahweh's righteousness. And you see that in the world. You see it very rapidly, because Pope Francis, when he got elected to be Pope, Catholics were always looked at as these strange religious figures, that you had to comply with these regulations or you're going to get excommunicated and you're not going to receive communion. And Pope Francis, he came out, I guess the last pope wasn't doing such a great job. He wasn't a great enough Santa Claus. He was scaring all the children away for Christmas. But Pope Francis came out and he started, who am I to judge? And, it doesn't matter if you're an atheist or, if you're a Satanist or, as long as you're believing something, then you're going to be able to have this promise of life, which we know that they're not offering life. He's deceiving the people by telling them that there's this promise of life, but we know it's not life, but he's telling them that they're going to be all just fine and dandy as long as they have a belief and they come to the Catholic Church, and not necessarily that they want them to come to church, but they want them to bring their money to church. Remember what Pastor talked about when he was talking about, Pope Francis was talking about, people living simpler lives and putting down all this wealth and things. Well, the Catholic Church didn't start, selling their big statues and melting their gold down and things. No, they wanted people who were building these empires and stuff to start bringing more money, more increase, more revenue into the Catholic Church, because they got a lot of different things they're having to pay off here because of their sins, and it's getting quite pricey. And they're also trying to make the greatest land grab that we've ever seen, using this geopolitical system to actually spread this deception and this wickedness. But remember, Yahweh promises us that the laws we're teaching, the laws that we're teaching those gathering will not ever depart. And this is in verse 26 right here. Pastor says this. He says, Yahweh is hovering over his house right now. And now if you go outside and you look up, you're not going to see the face of Yahweh, but, Yahweh's presence. Remember, we're standing on the sea of glass. Yahweh's presence, he's hovering, he's watching over his house right now. Everything we do right now, man, is being written down and recorded, and these things are made available for Yahweh to see. He's guiding it to bring the biggest gathering ever out of Egypt. This will be the second time. This time it won't fail. Remember, Yahweh's presence is at his Sabbaths and his feasts. That his eyes and his heart will be with us perpetually, as was written by Solomon here at Yahweh's house. This will be the second time, the second gathering. This time it won't fail. Yahweh promises us that the laws that we're putting in their mouths will not depart from their mouths, nor from their children, nor from their children's children forever, he said. So sin has reached its peak, and they peaked. They're going downhill. There's nothing but a slippery slope on the other side, and it's going to fall fast. Yahweh's way, these laws that Yahweh is pushing here in these last days, he promises us that these laws that we're teaching those who are gathering will not ever depart. We're actually the generation that's going to see this turnaround. This last generation is actually going to see this turnaround and Yahweh's administration be ushered in, and we're going to see an end to sin. It's really a great joy to look forward to. Now, some of this sin here, in verse 34 here, Pastor goes into a little bit more of this. Remember, we read a little bit about the, they have these different apps and stuff that are spreading these sexually transmitted diseases. But in verse 34, Pastor says, chlamydia. Do you remember when I first told you about chlamydia? I believe it was on the stage right over there. That was the old stage over there. The sanctuary used to be flipped the other way. And then in verse 35, he says, well, right now, it's opened the door to cancer. They're just now finding it out. They're just now finding out that it actually causes cancer. Chlamydia and cancer, a new connection, the article says, that they're finding. So they're just finding these things, and Pastor's been teaching these things now for many, many, many years, but they're just starting. They've been trying to blame cancer on all these different sorts of things, the dust from the roads and, sawdust and all these different things that they call carcinogenics, and all that's about is making revenue. They're not really trying to make people healthier, but the things that have actually been causing these sicknesses, they haven't really, either they were too dumb to find the connection, or they weren't really looking for it, But what it was, Yahweh was holding them back to understanding these things until this was brought by his servant Yisrayl. Pastor brings these things out, and then you start seeing these things come out in the news. Verse 36, viruses behind oral cancer epidemic. Epidemics. Have you ever heard that word before? The Savior told you to watch for it in this generation. Disease epidemics would be the worst ever in history. It would take pretty much of a fool not to believe the Savior's words now, especially if you read any news articles concerning these disease epidemics we're having in this generation. There has never been a time like it. Remember Yeshua wrote that, almost 2,000 years ago in Matthew chapter 24, where he showed about these great disease epidemics, and these great famines and these great wars. And he said that it would be so bad that if Yahweh didn't step in and stop it, all hope of life would be lost. Yeshua spoke that. The disciples wrote it 2,000 years ago. How did he know it was going to be in this generation? How did he know they were going to have bombs that could darken the sun? How did he know that we would be here in the house of Yahweh teaching, and he would be guiding us as high priest 2,000 years after he said it? How did he know all that? That there would be a man named Yisrayl standing up preaching to all the world 2,000 years from the time he said, yeah, I think it would be somewhat of a fool not to believe it. And that's why Yeshua said, fools and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Because Yahweh, he foretold these things by his prophets, before the Savior came. And he foretold the Savior's coming. And when Yeshua came, he foretold what would take place in our day 2,000 years before we ever even existed, before this land ever existed, before knowledge was increased, before there was the last day's work of Yahweh established. Yeshua foretold these things. So you can see the foolishness that unbelief actually spreads, and it's like a disease epidemic. Unbelief is like a disease epidemic because people start disbelieving what has been written, then they start disbelieving what has been spoken by Yahweh's messengers, and before you know it, they totally disbelieve anything, and they're just like Pope Francis, well, this must be right, or that must be right, or I guess this is okay, I ate that pork last night, and I got a little indigestion, but I'm still breathing. This is their mentality. If it's not instant, quick, then they just feel like, well, they can keep on sinning, and it's not causing anything. And so you can see why Yahweh is allowing mankind to bring themselves to this peak of sin, where they're almost going to annihilate all the earth's inhabitants. They're going to kill 4/5 of the earth's inhabitants. And so you can see how Yahweh's He's allowing them to come to that point that they have to get to so they can actually, wake up, and realize that they've done, wrong for 6,000 years. And we men have an opportunity to be the teachers and the guides to them when Yahweh brings them to his house. May Yahweh bless your Sabbath. May you continue to remain strong and faithful. Continue to study. And at this time, if you all please stand, I have the privilege and opportunity to introduce to you the great Kohan, Michael Hawkins.
Shalom, men. Please be seated. The world's getting to be a bad, bad place. Really sick. So let's look on page 394. Let's take off here on page, this article here. On verse 47 here where it says, your vegetarian hot dog may contain meat and human DNA. Test finds human DNA in hot dogs. Meat in vegetarian products. Cutting-edge genetic testing has found human DNA in some samples of hot dogs, and meat was found in a shocking number of vegetarian substitutes. So see, even though people think that they're eating a substitute, they're thinking they're eating vegetarian or vegan and so forth, you just never know. 2% of the samples tested positive for human DNA, and a whopping 66% of vegetarian hot dogs contained evidence of such contamination. Now, this is the kind of stuff that's going on out there in the world that people really aren't thinking about and aren't aware of. They just think they can get out there and eat whatever. They never think. See, this is why Yahweh's laws are a protection. Because if you strictly follow Yahweh's laws, they protect you from all of these things. You won't fall victim to this kind of stuff. That's why the House of Yahweh checks all things out and so forth, and make sure that, we are blessed with what we have so we don't have to get this garbage from the world. Look down at verse 52. It says, well, these brain tumors, okay, because they discovered that they're getting brain tumors. Like it says in verse 50, research journal reports hot dogs linked to leukemia and brain tumors, notice. So these brain tumors, they're created them. They're not supposed to be in mankind. These things were never supposed to be created to begin with, okay? Now that word create, we usually think that, to bring into existence is what it means. But it also means to invest with a new form. To invest with a new form. Office or rank. Well, of course, these are the gods that have newly come up. They have made these things into a new form. And the word create also means to produce or to bring about by a course of action or behavior. So a course of action or behavior. And of course, this is the sins, this is the curses from the STDs that are doing these things, causing these problems by their actions and the behaviors of those people who do not keep Yahweh's laws. So these things were never supposed to be created to begin with. When Yahweh didn't create these, man created these by first off rebelling against Yahweh's laws. If you rebel against Yahweh's laws and you commit things that he says, that you to stay away from, then it's going to cause confusion. And that's what he said in Leviticus 18. It causes confusion. He said, don't do this. Well, how does it cause confusion? Well, your mind is confused so that it can't get in your brain to make proper decisions because you can't think straight, Your mind just can't operate correctly. And that's what he's speaking of. He says, this will get into your brain. So when you eat these things that you're not supposed to, this will get in your brain, and it causes confusion because it causes your brain not to operate correctly. You got to remember, these things are microscopic, so therefore when they get into the brain, they go into different areas and stuff that can interrupt the signals that's going through your brain because your brain works on electrical impulses and so forth. Well, if these things can get in there and disrupt those electrical signals, then the confusion of the mind takes place because your brain can't process the things that it's supposed to be processing, and so therefore you go into utter confusion. It's kind of like when people go to do something and they just stand there and this blank look goes on their face and their mind just goes blank and they forgot what they were going to do. This is the type of reaction that comes about. So he says this will get into your brain and it will cause you to be confused to where you can't make sensible decisions, and you'll stay angry like Cain and you'll murder like Cain. And that's exactly what took place with Cain. Remember, he says, why are you angry, Cain? Why are you angry? Why did you do these things? And he goes through the whole spiel and gives him the solution that if he would repent and turn back into Yahweh, then he could overcome all of this sin and so forth. So Cain, remember, was not keeping Yahweh's laws. He wasn't eating the proper things. His mind couldn't function properly, so therefore it shows forth in his actions. And that's what we see going on in the fourth part of the earth right now, murder by the thousands. And of course, that's what the scripture says, is that the whole world is going the way of Cain, and especially in that fourth part of the earth there where we see all this devastation taking place now, and the hatred is building up. All right, verse 54 here. He says, and that's the reason Yahweh tells you in Deuteronomy 6, verse 7, to diligently teach this to your children. Diligently teach. Now, the word teach means to cause to know something. It cause you to know something. It also means to cause to know how. How does something react, against you and so forth, or what is the cause of certain things. Teach also means to cause to know the disagreeable consequences. I like that one. To cause to know the disagreeable consequences. In other words, the curses. So if you teach your children that if this is disagreeable with Yahweh, meaning it's disagreeable with your body, it's disagreeable with your mind, it's disagreeable with the spirit of Yahweh, then curses will come as a result. So stay away from it. Take heed. So he says, well, how how often do you do this? He says, when you rise up, and how often do you rise up? When you go to bed, or how often do you go to bed? That's your job to teach your children. He says, he didn't say you must have children, but he said teach them. Okay? If you've got them, then your job, you're commanded to teach your children so that they won't wind up in the hospital with something that comes out from the 7 years of Rome, this influences that take place. But even if you don't have children, you're still responsible for teaching the children of the house of Yahweh, being an example to them. That's how you teach. See, top of verse 56 here, he says, the children of men, now talking about this article, continue on with this article, it says, the children of men who ate franks, and remember those franks, they had tested to find human DNA in the hot dogs and meat, which could be human meat as well, in the vegetarian ones. But the children of men who ate the franks often, notice, it didn't have to be them, the person who eats it itself, but it's the children of these men who ate franks. It passed on to that generation. It passed on to the children. So the offsprings are affected in that manner. He says they don't even have to eat them themselves. The children of men who eat franks, they're talking about pork franks now, had an 11 times greater risk of leukemia than normal. 11 times greater. Now you would think when somebody would see that study there that they would freak out and get away from pork altogether, you know. But it doesn't bother them. Why? Because their minds are already confused so that they can't comprehend the warnings that are presented to them. So they don't take it. They just don't heed the warnings. Now, kids who ate the most ham, bacon, and sausage had a triple risk of lymphoma, brain cancer, brain tumors. He says they're increasing like STDs. You know, it's just nothing stops these things, it seems like. It's just continually growing, getting worse and worse and worse because sin has reached its peak, remember, in the last days. So therefore, all of these things are growing. Now, he also goes on and he reads this article, mad cow disease from pork. He says, now, who would ever imagine or even think that you could get mad cow disease from pork? You know, well, the pig, it eats everything. The pig is like a buzzard. You know, swine, they're made for that purpose to clean up the earth, and man is not supposed to eat buzzards. Man's not supposed to eat swine either. These are the earth cleaners. These are the things that clean up the earth and keep the earth clean. They can digest that. They can eat this stuff, and it wouldn't bother them if it was eaten in a certain particular way. But what's mankind has gotten a hold to it and has mutated these things, then if they eat it, of course, then they can spread it to others. And they spread it through their source. So this is why another protection, why Yahweh said, don't eat these things. Okay? If they wouldn't eat them, they wouldn't have to worry about getting infected with these things. But because they don't, and they eat the swine, they're subject to these things. Mad cow's disease from pork may cause Alzheimer's. Okay? Pork intake and human papillomavirus-related disease. International correlations suggest that pork intake is positively, notice, positively associated with incidence of cervical cancer. Pork? You're going to eat pork, and you can get cervical cancer. And of course, there's a lot more involved in that than just eating the pork. But that shows you how this influences the mind and ends up getting into the bodies of people. Okay? Because, of course, what causes that cervical cancer was mixed in with the pork, it was mixed in with the pig, and mixed in with the actions of these people. Remember the word create, how mankind created these things, created. The word create means to produce or bring about by a course of action or behavior. Well, it's their behavior that caused these things. So pork intake positively associated with the incidence of cervical cancer, a disease also related to HPV. Pork meat or dietary factors associated with pork meat consumption may be involved in the development of HPV-related diseases. And he says it all comes from 2 Corinthians 6:17. He says, read it. Come out of them and touch not the unclean. Okay? That's a warning. That's a warning that contamination can be spread. So you can see when you follow Yahweh's laws, there is safety there. You know, he keeps us safe from these things to protect us so the harm won't come upon us when we do what he says to do. Verse 61 here says, the thing that the world doesn't realize today is that in the grocery market itself, the butchers don't even look at this stuff as being unclean. You know, to them, unclean means something wasn't washed, you know. And the people who handle your pork chops handle your beef steaks and your ground beef. And when they grind this stuff, the stuff that falls, the scraps, they all fall together and they don't throw the stuff away. They end up, you know, sweeping the stuff up and putting in the wieners. That's where they get these pork sausages and stuff from. You know, that's why when you look at them, you remember the packages, sometimes they would say all beef, of course, or all pork. But lots of times, what was it? It was pork, beef, and chicken, right? Because they take all their scraps and they throw all their scraps in there together and they grind it all up and they produce this stuff that's gross looking, right? It comes out. You ever see that? You throw it all in these machines and they make all this, it comes out like a goo. It's just, it doesn't even look like meat. It's just goo. And then it's poured out. It kind of looks like dough almost. And it's poured out and then it's forced into the little sausage containers, and then they wrap them up and cook them. But that's the reason why when you look at them, they have that consistency. It's not meat. It's not like the House of Yahweh. We have real ones. Verse 62, he says, in Revelation 18, he tells you, Yahweh tells you, of course, he warns you of these curses, these plagues. And in Revelation 18:1, he says, and after these things I saw another Moloch. Of course, that word another should be the same one, as Strong shows. The same Moloch. He saw the same Moloch come down from heaven. That is, he was instructed from heaven, like Yeshua was. Remember it says Yeshua came down from heaven? Well, he didn't come down from heaven. The scripture tells you that. He was born. He had to be born as a man, But it's the same with us as it says that we are born. Remember, he told Nicodemus, he says, you must be born from above. You must be born from heaven. Okay? So we have the same type of thing here. So he says, this Moloch came down from heaven. So he came down. Of course, he's got Yahweh's character, and everything that comes from Yahweh is the way that he is. And that's the way the prophets describe him, right? And so he says that's what yours is doing right now. Your character is becoming like Yahweh in heaven. It's coming from Yahweh in heaven and having great authority, and the earth was enlightened with his glory. Okay? So the glory, the word of Yahweh, the teachings and the instruction that he has, the earth is being enlightened through this Moloch. In verse 2, and he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. Now, if you notice, it says, is fallen, is fallen. So it shows you there twice. And it's not just talking about the first Babylon, but it's the second Babylon, the Babylonian system that has engulfed the whole world. At one time, Babylon, the original Babylon only had one certain part of the area of the earth, because that's all where mankind was. Well, once mankind spread throughout the entire earth, then of course this Babylonian system spread as well. So Babylon has fallen, and it's become the habitation of demons, notice. Demons, okay? This is the power behind all of this God worship. The demons are the ones that influence the God worship. The idol of Mary, is nothing. It's just a piece of material. You knock it over, it could crack, and that's it, and break into pieces. It's a statue. It's nothing. But the demons behind it that influences the people who go into worship and to venerate, as they like to say. They don't worship, they venerate the statues. Well, then, this is where the demons work with them and, of course, influence the hearts and the minds of these people to fall into God worship. And the hold of every foul spirit, notice. It's not clean spirits, it's foul spirits, okay? And this is one of the things where we learned as well when, casting out demons, that you would cast out the foul and unclean spirits. Because you wanted to make sure you covered the whole base of all of these spirits, and got rid of these things. And a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. And then he says, of course, all these nations have drunk of the wine. Of course, that's the teachings. And every nation is drunk with it. And of course, they go through the wrath of her fornication. And the kings of the earth have committed this fornication with her. Of course, causing her to do these things. And they follow suit in following right along with her. In verse 66, and then the merchants of the earth have grown rich. Okay? The merchants of the earth have grown rich. Because just like we read here, like with these wieners and stuff, okay? Like it says the butcher shops and people, they put all this stuff in there and pile it in there in the food. People don't know what they're eating. They have no clue what they're eating, If they did, they wouldn't be eating this stuff. But they don't know that it's there, And just like all food, when was the last time you ate food that really tasted like it's supposed to? You know what I'm saying? You go and you buy fruits and vegetables and so forth. They don't have the taste that they used to have, because the taste is gone. So what do? Well, they put flavor enhancers in it, right? Orange juice, when you buy orange juice, real orange juice, it's bland and almost bitter to the taste, But you buy the stuff where they put the flavor enhancers in there, and this is the best tasting stuff you ever drank in your life, But when they make this stuff, they make it, and they store millions and millions of gallons of orange juice in storage facilities for as long as up to a year or more or whatever. And then what they have done, though, is they found that when scientists go out, and this is their livelihood, they go out, all of these labs and stuff, all these food companies they always have all these labs that they go to and they fund. They'll go out to the tree, the orange tree, and they'll attach something to it, and they'll take a little sample, and then they'll break down the molecules. They'll break that sample down to the molecular level and see what flavors, enhancers, and stuff are in there. Then they produce it, and then they add it into the food. And research has shown, and people know, that lots of times when you eat something, remember the old saying with the potato chips, you couldn't just eat just one, because you desired to eat another one after you ate one. But they do that to certain foods, so when people eat these things, they want more, And so, of course, the merchants get rich, right? You're going to buy more of their product. But these are things that they add into the food so that when you eat it, you would desire to eat more of it, and you will. You'll go and you'll buy more of it. So this is all ways in which they have messed around with the foods and caused problems with different things. So he says, okay, here, this is where the money comes in. And selling all of these things, these delicacies that have filled with human DNA now, they've got human in them as well as pig and whatever else. In fact, he says, I don't know of the documentaries and news programs that say this. The doctors look at this and they show you the ground beef, and then he says, I don't know what's in there. You don't know what's in that. And he's telling people, you don't know what's in that when you get this ground beef. And, they admit it. They admit it to people, but it's still it goes right over their head. They just don't comprehend what's being said there, And remember, the Moloch is as we just read there in Revelations 18, he's crying with a mighty voice, warning people that Babylon is fallen. It's fallen because it's being exposed, remember. Okay, it's being exposed. And this is the voice of Yahweh. And of course, the word voice means talking about discourse and addressing someone. And that's exactly what the seventh Moloch does. He addresses the world, and every time he speaks, he addresses the world and presents this information out there to people to be able to have. And so this Babylon falling, that's the entire message that's being brought forth to this world, that Babylon is falling. Verse 67, he says, through the abundance of her delicacies. Okay? The abundance of her delicacies. The delicacies, refers to luxury and eager desire. That's the meaning of the word delicacy. You have eager desire to go after these things, but remember, in Proverbs, I think it's Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, remember we're warned, put a knife to your throat. Don't go after the king's dainties, right? Don't look at these things and desire these things, because, he says it right here, he says, That's one of Yahweh's prophets said you better stick a knife to your throat when you start to desire the king's meat, okay? Don't do it because of the fact that these things are enticing. It's out there. It's very enticing. In fact, that's what advertisement is all about. Advertisement is to entice a person. And I remember years ago they said that if they can't catch your attention in the first 2 seconds when something pops up, they've lost a sale. But if they can catch your attention, they can grab you and they can put it in your head. Then when you go to the store, you have that jiggle. You'll see something, whatever. That's why they use certain colors and certain shapes and so forth, and these little jingles that go along with it. So it clues you in that when you go into a store and you see that, you're drawn to it. And in your mind, you don't know why you like that particular product. Well, you like it because it's been advertised, and you saw it 15 times last night when you were watching TV. So that when you went to the store and you saw it, you just decided to grab it and try it out, I guess, They don't realize that this is what's going on in their heads, in their minds, and this is how Satan is playing with their minds. If she can do that, which remember, she is queen of the airwaves, right? She can influence these things, and so therefore, she can grab a hold to a person and do much greater things to them. So they're talking about these diseases and stuff. In verse 72, it says, the diseases begins as blisters. This is a new one. He says the hand, foot, and the mouth disease. The babies look like they're really hurting when they have this stuff, and they're suffering. And do they care? Is there any caring in the world today? If the person's got the money that he's taking to the bank, is he really concerned about the children? He put them in the hospital. They could care less. They just want to cash. They want to cash in that money, man, and bring it to the banks. They don't care about what takes place. You see, and that's the thing with pharmaceutical companies. Whenever they put out all these pharmaceuticals, and they know, the tests reveal. I mean, even whenever you hear the commercials, and they say it can bring forth death, and you're going to go ask your doctor if that's right for you? Well, you need to go see a doctor, maybe a different type of doctor, But they know, and they set aside billions of dollars. They set aside billions of dollars for lawsuits. And later on, about another year or so down the road, when they start raking in all of the hundreds of billions of dollars, and then some people start suing because of maybe a few deaths or something like that, well, now they fight it off with the $1 billion that they already set aside for the lawyers and say, go ahead and handle it, We already made money off of it. So even if they stopped producing it and got it off the market, they already made hundreds of billions of dollars. So it doesn't matter to them a few billion that they can set aside and let the lawyers take care of it. Life means nothing to these people, It's really a sick world that we live in. It's evil, extremely evil. That's why we don't have any part with it. We want to come out of it all the way. But this suffering here, This suffering, it reminds me of Romans 8:20 where it says, for the creation was made subject to emptiness, which that means an unsuccessful searching for joy and peace. But it's not willingly that creation was made that way, but it was by Yahweh's will. Yahweh allows all creation right now to have to suffer because of sin, okay? And so if we can keep that in our heads, we'd be more apt to watch what we think, what we say, how we act towards one another, to keep from affecting all of those microbes that's out there, because they suffer, and they suffer tremendously because of the sins of mankind. Not that they asked for it, None of creation asked to be able to have mutations. I mean, how would you like to be a microbe living in the air, and all of a sudden the air around you is invaded with these mutants coming up to you? Remember, they rape one another and so forth, and destroy one another. There's fightings and wars and hatred among them. All of these things were affected because of sin. Well, that's why he goes on. He says, he talks about when he was in Oklahoma, and when he was a young man, he said that, he was stayed out of the world. They didn't go into the world that much, and he says you need to. In verse 78, he says, be thinking along these lines if you have to. He says, we do shopping for people so that you won't have to go out there and take your children with you. He says, I wouldn't take a child to town. There's just too much sickness going on around there, and you can get this stuff. In fact, shopping, like you said too, shopping becomes, it's more of a habit that people have and a desire that they have. Rather than a need, it's a desire that they want to go out there, And people in the cities live to where they have no food stocked in their house. They go out to buy everything. They want a glass of milk, well, they go out of the store and buy some, quarter milk, whatever. They want a glass of orange juice in the morning, they go out and get that, and they buy everything just enough to what they have. So you can see that when it takes place in the world to where the food supplies are cut off from these cities, a lot of people are going to go crazy because they have nothing, because they're not taught to these things, to stock up these things or anything. So, but he goes on, he says, I wouldn't take a child shopping, because if you think about it. You take a child out there, and what are you teaching that child? You're teaching that child to lust after the world. That's all you're doing. You're actually pushing a child out and saying, here's the world, this is where all Satan's merchants are, and you push them out there so they can start lusting after things in the world. And they will, and they begin to covet these things. And it starts off last time, very simple things like cereal, right? Breakfast food. All the cereals that's out there on the market, they always give away these little prizes and all this kind of stuff in there, or save the box tops and all this kind of stuff to send in for this and send in for that. It's always going after the children, making the children lust and covet after things that they don't have. They desire those things. So he goes on, he talks about, of course, all this comes about from the Catholic Church. In verse 81 here, he says, talking about the 7 heroes of Rome and the Pope, he's the leader of the kings of the earth. He says morality is forbidden to be taught in this organization. It was to begin with, but it was never with that church. It never was with the Coptic religion. And he says, well, there's a lot of money, verse 82, there's a lot of money in the hospitals, and so the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians bring forth that way of life to bring money. And it's never stopped. They have it designed that way so that you would eat this food that's contaminated to keep you sick, so that you will have to go to the doctor. And of course, the doctor is persuaded that if he gives this prescription, he can get money from the pharmaceutical companies, so therefore it's going to keep the doctors continually to prescribing stuff. And that's why all these commercials say, ask your doctor if it's right for you. They give themselves away every time they do that and show you, what's going on. And that's what that's what's all behind this stuff. Verse 83 says, they teach them from day one to children, and they put them in front of television sets that teach them to sin. If they teach them to sin, they teach them to get sick. They teach them how to get this sickness and disease, and then they teach them to take themselves to the hospital, where the money pours into the pockets, as shown in Revelation 9, saying that you're not going to repent of these wars, and you're not going to repent of these pharmaceuticals, the drugs that you're selling. The money is just too much. There's just too much money in it. And of course, they're going to continue doing that right up to the time till the sun is darkened. That's the evil and the wickedness that's found in this world. May Yahweh bless you, man. Let's go.